Hi everyone, welcome to the Highlights from Ukraine podcast, your daily audio summary of the latest news reported in the Ukrainian media. My name is Artem, and here is the news. 1071 days left the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Yesterday, Ukraine marked the anniversary of the Battle of Krute, when in 1918 forces of the independent Ukraine's People's Republic fought against overwhelming forces of Communist Russia trying to stop their advancement at Kyiv. Despite fierce fighting of Ukrainian troops, they lost. In his evening video address, the President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky informed that he visited Askol's grave in Kyiv, where heroes of Krute were buried. There, Zelensky honored every Ukrainian warrior who gave his or her life for the country's independence. Quote, "We must always remember them and the young men and women who are now being educated in our military educational institutions, Ukrainian cadets, Ukrainian Lyceum students, I met with them today. They must also realize this truth. Ukraine exists as long as there are people willing to fight for it." Unquote. New U.S. State Secretary Marco Rubio has made new exceptions in his decision to freeze foreign aid funding, reports European Pravda, citing Washington Post. Rubio has agreed to continue funding humanitarian programs that provide core life-saving medicine, medical services, food, shelter, and sustenance assistance, as well as supplies and reasonable administrative costs as necessary to deliver such assistance. However, he did not grant exceptions for programs related to abortions, family planning conferences, gender, diversity initiatives, transgender surgeries, or other non-life-saving assistance. This resumption is temporary in nature and except by separate waiver or as required to carry out this waiver, no new contracts shall be signed. Some officials speaking anonymously said that they are still seeking clarity on what qualifies as life-saving activity. Last week, Rubio ordered a freeze to all new foreign aid payments pending review. Officials and NGO workers in Ukraine have warned that without the Secretary of State's approval, critical programs, such as support for schools and hospitals, as well as efforts to develop economic and energy infrastructure, could face disruption. Rubio's directive does include some exceptions, notably for military funding to Israel and Egypt, as well as foreign emergency food aid. Meanwhile, U.S. military assistance remains unaffected by the freeze and continues flowing to Ukraine under decisions made by the previous Biden administration. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the issue in his evening video address. Quote, "Today, an initial report was given by government officials and team of the office, Alexei Kuleba and Viktor Mikita, on critical programs that are now suspended and were previously funded by American support. I have already instructed them to do some key things at our internal expense, as well as to communicate with the Europeans." Unquote. According to him, in the energy sector, there were programs for distributed generation, other resilience programs for Ukrainian communities, for cities and villages. The U.S. assistance supported veteran projects like hubs, support lines, assistance in setting up veterans' private businesses. Another segment of support was reconstruction of border crossing points to accelerate economic activity and increase the transparency of customs officers' work. The Ukrainian leader said that Kyiv will seek a greater internal resource to cover temporary loss of U.S. funding. Ekonomiczna Pravda analyzed that in 2024, Ukraine received $6.05 billion through U.S. aid programs, including $3.9 billion in direct budget assistance, a grant that was transferred to the state budget on an irrevocable basis to finance non-military expenditures. Excluding the grant to the state budget, the largest amount of U.S. aid funding went to economic development programs, $1.05 billion, humanitarian assistance, $580 million, and funding for programs promoting democracy and protecting human rights, $340 million. We would really appreciate if you could rate us, ideally with 5 stars, and leave a glowing review in the app where you're listening to this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others. This really helps more people to find out about the highlights from Ukraine and truth about Russia's invasion. The U.S. Institute for the Study of War writes that Putin indicated that he will not view any peace agreement with Ukraine as binding by claiming that the Ukrainian government is either unwilling or unable to resign the 2022 Ukrainian presidential decree banning negotiations with Putin, reports Union. He further claimed that Zelensky is no longer able to legally resign the decree because he is no longer the legitimate president of Ukraine, and that the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada could resign the decree but does not seem interested in doing so. The Ukrainian constitution does not empower the Verkhovna Rada to unilaterally resign presidential decrees. However, a decision to do so could itself violate the Ukrainian constitution. Kremlin officials, including Putin, have repeatedly used deliberately false interpretations of Ukraine's law and constitution to claim that Zelensky is the legitimate president of Ukraine after Ukraine, adhering to its law and constitution, did not hold elections under martial law in 2024. The experts believe that Putin's statements rejecting the legitimacy of the Ukrainian government and of a possible future peace agreement set conditions for Russia to justify violating any future agreement with Ukraine. Putin has repeatedly claimed that every Ukrainian government since the 2014 pro-Western revolution of dignity in Ukraine has been illegitimate. The Kremlin has nevertheless engaged in negotiations and reached agreements with Ukrainian officials, including regarding the resolution of armed conflict with the Minsk agreements of 2014 and 2015. Putin has also consistently violated these agreements and used similar claims about the illegitimacy of the Ukrainian government to justify these violations. The Kremlin leader continues efforts to coerce US President Donald Trump into bilateral negotiations that exclude Ukraine, impose his desired negotiation framework on Trump, and compel Trump to inadvertently endorse ongoing Russian information operation about the illegitimacy of the current Ukrainian government. Thank you for listening to the Highlights from Ukraine podcast, a non-commercial initiative of just two people, and we need your help to grow. Share information about the podcast, rate us in the app, subscribe to our Patreon. With your support, we are getting better.
We call on you to demand from governments of your countries to impose the toughest sanctions possible on Russia and its citizens to stop their invasion of Ukraine.